institutions was a dominant position, whether in the IMF, whether in the WTO, whether in the World Bank. That position is taking a severe beating. All these institutions were at the beck and call of the US, but now the US and the Europeans are asking Saudis, the Chinese, the Japanese and the Indians to come in a major way and to help out. So the shape of these various institutions is going to change. That's another important thing that will happen. And my own suspicion is, which is the last point, most economies will start going protectionist. The reason is that suppose I inflate my economy, like the Indian economy, we have a budget, a supplementary demand for grants of 2,33,000 crores passed. This means the fiscal deficit will go to 8% from 3%, which was what the FRBM required. Now we'll go to 8%. And now another 75,000 crores is being talked about. So therefore the fiscal deficit will go to about 9 or 10%. Okay. So today no government is worried about the fiscal deficit because the situation is abnormal. Fiscal deficits are going to run out of control. And everywhere in the US economy, they have raised their borrowing limit from $9 trillion to $12 trillion. Okay, suddenly $3 trillion extra they think they may have to borrow to control the situation. So nowhere now fiscal deficits will be what people will talk about. So this will pump in huge amounts of funds and liquidity into the economy. And what will happen as a result of all that is that to control the situation, we require a new financial architecture. We require a new kind of linkage between the financial sector and the real sector of the economy. Because then only things will start moving. Without that, things will not start moving. And suppose I increase my fiscal deficit. In an open economy, the demand leaks out. So if the US economy is pumping up demand, that demand will go to everywhere else in the world. Okay? Therefore, the US economy will try to be protectionist. It will try and protect its jobs. It will try and protect its own demand creation. And that's why Barack Obama, when he comes, might actually move into that, where BPOs, call centers, etc. He might actually say that if we give you money, you must create jobs in America. That's the kind of thing that is likely to happen. Okay? So protectionism is a real danger at this point of time. Because every economy will try to protect its back so that the demand doesn't leak out. Because everybody is trying to create a greater fiscal. Now, the only way we can prevent that is a new architecture in which there's a new architecture of the international relations, okay, which is much more equal and much more equitable. Only then will this demand leakage not be a problem. But the pressures will be to first protect your own back. And if you're trying to protect your own back, then the nature of IMF, the nature of WTO, etc. will change. And that's a major problem that will come in. Okay. Now, there are many conclusions, but I'll stop with this because I can see that time is running out and there should be time for questions. And that is, financial sector of about $600 trillion, nothing that you can do, nothing that all the governments together can do to prevent its collapse unless a completely new financial architecture is talked about. But who will implement that financial architecture? But the real economy of $65 trillion, because after all, that's the real economy. Those factories exist, those fields exist, those offices exist. That $65 trillion is easier to protect than the collapse of the $600 trillion. So governments would have to take a call. How much of the financial sector and in what form can be protected? But the real economy and the real employment must be protected. Now this is the tragedy where the US government is willing to give to AIG. It started by giving $85 billion, then gave $38.6 billion, and now the whole package has become $150 billion. Okay? But when the General Motors is collapsing, it's not willing to give $25 billion. And why is that? Because the world of policy making and economics is ruled by the finance people. As you know, for the last 6 years, who has been the US Treasury Secretary? A man from Goldman Sachs. All the people who have been US Treasury Secretary in the last 6 years are all from Goldman Sachs. So they are protecting the financial sector. They are not protecting the real sectors of the economy. Okay? So unless policymakers come from the financial sector and from the real sector, and there's a balance between the two that is created, what will happen is that the real sector will continue to collapse. And as unemployment results, as other problems result, there'll be instability politically and socially. And that's what happened during the Depression. During the Depression of the late 20s, early 30s, there was a huge political and social instability. That's when fascism rose, that's when moved the world towards the Second World War, etc., etc. So if you don't protect your employment, you don't protect your factories, don't protect your real production, then you have the other problem. And in an unstable situation, even the financial markets cannot survive. So therefore, there has to be a certain amount of delinking. It's going to be very difficult, and we have to think out of the box. Okay? There's no way that what we have been thinking for the last 50 years, we can operate with that and get a solution to this problem. Okay? It has to be thinking out of the box, where we separate the financial sector and separate the real sector. The real sector has to be really protected, okay, from the collapse. Financial sector collapse is very hard to handle. So new ways, like this mark to market, which is one of the underlying problems, or why the collapse is setting in. Mark to market will have to be looked at. Certain other financial innovations that have been there, they would have to be looked at, and then only can we do something about it. Because after all, in the financial sector, we are making losses against each other. So if I'm making losses in borrowing from say Merrill Lynch, and Merrill Lynch is making losses with JP Morgan, and JP Morgan is making losses with Goldman Sachs, we can settle that internally. But that kind of thing is very, very hard. But today, only hard steps can protect us. So in other words, the crisis is very deep. Huge steps have to be taken. Thinking out of the box is very necessary, and without that it will not work. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I think I've really gone overboard.
તારા પાસે માઇક છે? Okay. We have 10 more minutes to go, and probably he can give some of the questions to be answered. Please. I'll just.
Now, don't you think that the new emerging areas will be more of the manufacturing and the system designs in other areas, which will create and generate new finance to meet with what we are looking at the depression?
Well, the new emerging technologies, the new emerging countries, have always been there. That's not something new. But you see, what I'm trying to point out is that the problem is a macro level problem. It's not a micro level problem. It's not that by tinkering with a little bit here, with a little bit there, we'll be able to overcome. As I said, you see, look at the size. The financial markets of $600 trillion to $1,000 trillion, they are collapsing. So the losses are in hundreds of trillions of dollars of paper wealth. Okay, that, you see, even if you have emerging economies like India with $1 trillion of GDP, or China with say $3 trillion of GDP, that will not prevent that collapse. So in other words, you see, you have to think about it, and that's where the delinking is very important. Delinking of the financial market from the real economy is a very important step. If you don't relink that, then this $600 trillion collapsing will collapse the $60 trillion of the real economy. So even though you still have the factories, you still have the offices, you still have the workers, okay, but because of the macro situation, they'll all go unemployed. Okay, so there was this theory about decoupling theory up till November 2007, that India and China would be decoupled from Asia would be decoupled from Europe and the USA. But what was found is that this kind of decoupling is not there. Okay, so therefore the decoupling has not worked, and everybody's given up that decoupling theory also. So it is the US economy, which is the largest economy in the world and the largest financial controller of all the resources, that is going to dominate everything else. So unless something is set right there, you will not have a solution coming out from the bottom. Yeah.
Any? Please. Can you stand up and tell? Can you stand up?
The global turmoil is affecting the Indian economy also. As you said that only the hard measures can save the economy. So now, what hard measures can Indian government take for preventing our economy?
Okay. Yeah. The Indian economy has now got globalized. After 1991, considerable amount of globalization. So whether it's our financial markets, stock market, other markets in the financial system, whether it's the energy market, food market, etc., they all got globalized. Huh? Now the Indian government is pushing in demand. Fiscal deficit is rising, liquidity is being pumped in. So even though FIIs are withdrawing money in a large amount, okay, the Reserve Bank is trying to keep the liquidity going further by cutting CRR and moving interest rates down, etc., etc. Okay. Still, that will not be enough. The reason is because the outside influences are far greater.